In this tutorial, we're going to look at turning an image sequence into a movie file which can be used in an editing program. Here I have a shot from the Lego animation, and in this folder you can see all the images which were captured using Helium Frog when I was animating. An image sequence is called an image sequence because the images are numbered in sequence. So it's very important that you leave this numbering as it is. Don't be tempted to go in and change the name of the files. I'm using a piece of free software called Time-Lapse Assembler. And when you open Time-Lapse Assembler, you'll see it's a relatively simple piece of software. The first thing it asks is where the folder of images are that you want to turn into a movie file. So I'll click on Choose, I'll go to my folder, and I'll click Open. The next option is the codec option. Codecs are really important for movie files because they tell the computer how much information to leave in or how much information to take out of the finished movie file. First, I'm going to create a movie file with the codec H.264. And this is a very universal codec, and it means that the file size will be quite small. The frame rate you can change to whatever you wish. I'm going to change this to 30. And for the dimensions of the movie, the size, or rather the resolution, I'm going to take off scale proportionally first, and that will let me change the width and height to what I want. So I'm going to tell it to be 1280 by 720, which is the original size of the images that I shot in Helium Frog. And next you can choose the quality. I'm going to turn my quality up to maximum, and then I'm going to click Encode. When you click Encode, Time-Lapse Assembler asks you where you want to save the movie file. So I'm going to save it outside the folder which all the images are in on the desktop, and I'm going to call this Lego Shot 5 and then click Save. When you click Save, Time-Lapse Assembler starts to encode the movie file from the image sequence. This is also called rendering, and how long it takes depends on how quick your system is and how long your shot is. So you can see here we now have a movie file which I can open up and play, and that seems fine. And this is now a movie file which I could upload onto YouTube or any video sharing site, or give to someone else to play on their computer. However, if I wanted to edit with this file, there's something quite important that you should know. If I right click and go to Get Info, you'll see that the size of this movie file is 36.8 megabytes, which is quite small. But if I go back to Time-Lapse Assembler, which is still open, and I change the option for the codec to RAW and leave everything else just as it is and click Encode, and this time I'll call the file Lego Shot 5 RAW. Time-Lapse Assembler will now render a movie file which has got raw information. What that means is it's going to keep all the visual information in the movie file. And when it finishes, we can see we have another movie file, Lego Shot 5 RAW. And if I open it up, to the naked eye it looks pretty much exactly the same. The colours are very, very slightly different, but it looks the same. We can't really see much difference unless we look at the file size of this movie file. And you'll see now that this movie file is 475.6 megabytes compared to the H.264 codec, which made the file 36.8 megabytes. This difference is to do with how much information has been left in the raw movie file. This is much better for editing. It takes up a bit more space on your hard drive, but if you want to maintain the quality of your animation, especially when you edit and render this out of a different piece of software such as iMovie or Premiere Express, it is worth rendering your image sequences out using a raw setting. Time-lapse assembler is free to download and use, and it's very handy for turning image sequences into movie files.